Hi everyone, Andrew here from the Time Series Insights program management team. Today, I want to introduce you to our JavaScript control library. So, as many of you know, we have the Time Series Insights Explorer, which is a great place for you to explore your data, to quickly do analytics on that data, and to empower a broad set of users to be able to find value from it. But we heard from many customers that while they really like the Time Series Insights Explorer, they actually need to be able to embed Time Series Insights into their own applications. Now, we've always had our APIs which enable users to do this, but not every organization has the technical depth to be able to do that very seamlessly. So what we set out to do was to build a control library that made it very, very simple for you to bake visualizations like those in the Time Series Insights Explorer into your own application. So here is a sample application that shows a variety of types of charts: line charts, bar charts, pie charts, even going into things like accessible graphs, as well as the heat map, to be able to bake these into your own application. So what I'd like to do in this video is step through the underlying source code so that you can understand how to use the JavaScript visualization library and to bake these types of visualizations into your own app. So the first thing you should note is that the JavaScript control library is completely open sourced. We have documentation and links to where you can go and you can find the code, but it's always really easy to inspect this element to view that underlying code. What I've done is I've actually gone ahead and placed it in VS Code to make it a little bit easier. So let me start by maximizing the screen to make it a little bit easier to read. And I'd like to start by calling out really where we are calling the underlying code. So the first thing to notice is line 14. In line 14, what you'll see is we've got a .js file. This .js file is really calling the underlying client library. Now, in line 15, what you'll see is we have our own .css file that really creates a lot of the stylistic components that are unique to Time Series Insights and unique to this particular JavaScript client. Now, as we scroll down, you'll notice that we've got all the containers that I previously mentioned. And as we get down to line 142, you'll see that this is where I would go and I would actually build out the adl.js code to build this application. So this is the code that authenticates my app, that registers it with Azure, and that enables any visualization on it to be able to authenticate with our backend such that you can render charts that are powered by Time Series Insights. The only code you really have to change here is in line 145 and 146, although there are some other things around error handling that you might find useful as well, notably lines 175 and below. Now, as we start to get down to line 202, what you'll see is we have a variety of examples, and these examples correspond with the different visualizations that you'll see. So this first chart is example 1, the second chart is example 2, and so on and so forth. So a couple of things to just quickly orient everyone to the underlying code. So the first thing you'll notice is that we've created a few variables out of the gate. The first variable is just a variable called aggregate expressions 2. What you'll see here is that we've created an array and we've left this array empty. And then we go ahead and pass in a start date and an end date variable. Now the start date in this case is going to be a particular time passed in UTC. And then the end date is actually just going to be a set amount of time afterwards. And we're using JavaScript milliseconds here to designate how far after that time period we want that to be. You don't have to do this. You can see that you could always just pass in a set end date that it corresponds to UTC as well. Now, the next thing we do is we create aggregate expressions. So these map to this particular variable that I'd initially created, and each of these expressions will be passed into this array. So what you'll see is that we new up a tsi-client.ux.aggregate expression. Now, tsi-client.ux is one of two major elements of the underlying JavaScript control library. This is a method call that allows us to render time series insights data or any time series data in the form of JSON really cleanly in something like a line chart, a bar chart, or a pie chart. Now, in this case, what we're doing is we new up this aggregate expression. We pass in a predicate string. Now, this predicate string should look awfully similar to the time series insights API for those of you that have had a look at that in the past. You will, however, notice a couple of unique things. One is that we pass in a color for the line itself, and we also pass in a friendly name to describe the chart itself that we're going to be passing along. So in this case, we have red, we have factory 1 pressure, purple, factory 2 pressure, etc. Now, as we get down, we have a few of these aggregate expressions. We're saying we want to look at this property pressure. This is a measure. It's type double because that's how time series insights treats them. We have some other aggregate expressions we'd like to see, an average, min, and max. And then we indicate that we want to map this to the variables we've created in start date and end date. As we get down to line 212, what you'll see is that we have this auth context.getTSI token. And what we're doing is we're actually calling the ADL code that we'd written up above that enables us to authenticate and to be able to call this time series insights environment and retrieve data from it, assuming that I'm able to log in. So the next thing you'll see is TSI client.server. Now, this is the second major element of this JavaScript control library. And what TSI client.server does is it allows us to talk very seamlessly to time series insights as a backend. So what you'll notice is that this .getAggregates, what it's doing is it's passing in a token, and the token maps to the authorization call I just made. It passes in a URL, which maps to the time series insights environment I want to call. And finally, it passes in this aggregate expressions array, which is an array of TSI aggregate calls that we want to make. And what it does is it returns JSON associated with these particular aggregate expressions. Now, this JSON is compressed when it's returned. And so the next thing you'll see is that we actually transform that for visualization. And so what you'll see is one call that is going to take that transformed result and it is going to turn it into JSON that is more amenable to graphing. The next thing it's going to do is it's actually going to call a line chart. Now, a line chart is just one of the underlying components of this control library. So with this one line of code, we are able to go and very easily pass in this notion of a line chart. You'll notice factory 1 pressure, factory 2 pressure, these average, min, max, red, purple, green. And what you'll see is that these correspond to all of these different aspects of the expressions that I passed just above. Additionally, we'll notice that we have this variable theme and we've called it light. This is a light themed, this is a dark themed graph. And so with this very small amount of code, I have been able to graph a line chart. Now, the next thing I want to do is I actually want to show you what these three graphs look like. So I've got graphs 3, 4, and 5. You'll notice I've got a line chart, a bar chart, and a pie chart. And what you can see is that the code is almost the same. The only thing that's different is now I've passed in a line chart, I've passed in an optional bar chart, and an optional pie chart as 3 different calls. And what this enables me to do is with just these additional 4 lines of code, I can take the same underlying set of data with the same start date and end date, and I can render them seamlessly as a different type of graph, making it incredibly easy for me to render data in ways that might be more contextual to the situation that I'm in. Now, the next thing I want to show you is the ability to pass in lines with other things like discrete events or staged events. And so I am going to go down to example 10. Now, we've chosen to hard code these events, but just know any JavaScript developer could easily go and create these to be dynamic based on the underlying data set. And keep in mind, this does not have to come from time series insights. This could come from another source as well, assuming that you pass the data in JSON that has a similar shape to this, with a time, a color property, and a value of whatever that color may be, a property description, and the string of what that description actually is. Now, what you'll notice is that the component states, which map to the particular stages of time underneath these events, you'll notice that the first one says cooling fan on. It's got the date range and it's got a color that maps to light blue. It's got the date range. It maps to this particular color, and so on and so forth. Similarly, with incidents, now what we have is this notion of a color, a description, and similarly a time. And this represents a discrete event. Now, the reason that someone would want to use this is they might want to say that there was maintenance being performed on a particular asset at a given time, and that should represent the reason why the lines are the way they are above. Similarly, a discrete event allows us to describe what was going on at a particular moment. For example, on and off are discrete events that might be useful to render within a line chart. So now you've seen a couple of examples from the JavaScript control library. Note, we'll continue to update this website with more examples as we add different elements and components to the underlying control library. But before we go, I wanted to show you an example of an application made using these controls. Now, in this application, what I've got is a set of windmills that are generating data in Calgary, Canada. I've integrated Azure Maps so that it's very easy for me to contextualize myself with where something is. I can interact with this map. And if I go and I click on one of these particular windmills, I am able to very quickly and easily start to learn about the underlying asset. Now, in this case, I can go and I can look day by day at total output of the windmill. I can see each day what's been going on. Now you'll notice for this particular windmill, I've got some rotor RPM going right now. It looks like the wind has picked up in this particular region. And we can see that we've got some data that's just started to come in. What's powerful about this is I can go and I can very easily bake powerful visualizations like this process graphic, include a map. I could even include live weather data from a weather API that I've got access to. And at any time, I can always embed a link to go into the Time Series Insights Explorer where I can start to analyze the underlying view of this data. So this is just a small example of what you have the ability to do using the JavaScript control library, but hopefully this provides some inspiration to begin to start building really powerful apps using this control library. Thanks so much for taking the time, and thanks for using the product.